in Unity are being used, how to best utilize the Unity interfaces, what are best practices for different things. We talked about best practices in scripting, in managing the projects and things like that. And we are around talking, we have started talking about scripting in C Sharp for Unity and how basically to, till now we have seen how to move something in Unity using C Sharp scripting. And now basically what we'll do from today onwards is we'll start learning things by creating projects. And that way you'll have something uh, to basically show after you're done with the course. You'll have some projects in your portfolio or some code that you'll be able to showcase while applying for it, internships or jobs in this area of game development, or even generally wherever you're applying, let's say for software development roles or whatever. uh, you'll be able to uh, show some projects that you have, some live projects that you've done. So we'll start talking about how we build those projects and basically take those projects from scratch, starting building them, and uh, how to basically deploy them and deploy it in such a way that people can access and people can view when you share it with them. So depending upon the size of the projects, like we'll start building with small, very small projects. Today's project today that what we'll start building with is something like this, which is one of the most simplest projects that you can game that you can build. It's basically kind of like it's called a rollerball. It's a project that Unity recommends that you start with whenever you start learning Unity. If you start learning Unity on your own also, and if you start looking through resources, this is the first project that you'll come through. So basically, it's a game where you are controlling a ball which is in the environment, and you have to collect some objects in the environment. Once you collect all the objects, the game is over and you win. Basically, so this is the most simplest form of a game that you can create, which combines all the different things that Unity has to offer, like basically different physics, different environments, different lighting settings, audio, and basically depending upon what you want to do with it, you can add levels, you can uh, add complexity to it. Like right now, if you see, it's basically just collecting some objects, right? You can add some obstacles in between, you can add something that it should not collect, things like that. So that depends on your creativity. How do you want to enhance this and how do you want to add it to your portfolio? But this is the very basic game that we start creating today, and we look at how things are done. So for some of the students who have just joined, I'll encourage you to start with some of the previous videos, at least the first, like we have not done a lot till now. We've only done four lectures, so that's like about 4 hours. And if you go through first two videos, they're mostly theoretically talking about what VR and AR and those kind of things mean, how they are different, how they are built, uh, what are the future aspects of those things and stuff like that. So I think you can start there. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. And then there's an outline of the course that we are following. So you can look into that as well. And if you have some questions, you can reach out. And I'll try to uh, cover some of the basic things while talking today as well. So let's start. Just a second. Okay, all right. So uh, this is the project that we have been working on till now, uh, Unity project. So for students who've just joined, what we did now, basically till now, is we have learned how to open Unity projects, create new projects, and things like that. So this is basically something that you'll install in your systems. This is something called Unity Hub, and this is basically where you'll manage different projects that you make in Unity, different versions of Unity that you install, and your licenses. And it has a community tab, it has a learn tab. You can look at those things. So basically, when you install this Unity Hub, it's available. You just search for download Unity Hub, and you will get this. Once you install Unity Hub, inside Unity Hub, you'll get come here and you'll install uh, the editor, the actual Unity editor. So for that, what you'll do is install editor and basically check the uh, get the version that we are on. We are basically using 2021.3.4 F1 LTS. I see that the latest version is 6 F1. So if you want to install this, that is also fine. But if you want to go back and install the same version that we are using, you can just go to the archive and for access to long term, click here and basically go there and download it from there. So basically, once you download, it will show up here like this, and then you can create a project coming here by coming here and creating a new project. So once you do that, you'll have a project listed here like this, like we have VIPS Unity course. This is the project that we created. And you can see that the editor version that we're using is 2021.3.4F1. So when I open this project, this is where we are at. So what we have done till now is basically we have created a cube in an environment, and we have in the last session we looked at different ways of moving that cube around in the environment, either by translation or by using physics, that is by adding force, and how to actually even control it using your keyboard as well. So this is something that we had in the last session. So now for today, what I'll do is we'll create a new scene. Let's create a new scene. So to create a new scene, basically what we'll do is we'll go in the scene folder and we'll right click, create scene, and we'll name this rollerball because this is what we are going to create. So now that we open it here, we can see that this is how, like we remember, if you remember correctly, that this is how all the new scenes that we'll create will open up in Unity. We'll have a main camera and we'll have a directional light, and everything else will be empty, right? So to start with today, what we'll let's look at what we actually have to build, right? So this is the video that we are referring, and this is the game that we'll be building. So what do you see is basically some kind of a ground is there, uh, and basically a ball is moving on top of that ground. You're controlling that ball, and there are some cubes that are in the environment, and then there's a boundary wall as well. So there are these components to the game that we are building, looking to build. So what we'll do is we'll start with the ground, and here I'll talk about some of the different ways that you can basically you will eventually look into creating the ground or terrains and stuff like that. So there are a few different ways that you can do that. So uh, for people who have been following till now, you know that there are different ways that you can add primitive objects in the scene. One is you can go here and click game object and 3D objects and add cube, sphere, and things like that. This is how we learned. The other way is that you can come here and click add and then 3D objects and add these things. The other way is clicking right clicking here and then 3D objects, and we can add this. So this is what we'll create our complete game with. This first game we'll create with these primitive shapes that are available in Unity. So for ground, what we can do is there are a few different ways that you can basically make a ground, right? So in a general sense, when you're creating a large game, when you're creating a game where, let's say, you have a first person shooter kind of a game like PUBG or Fortnite or any other Counter Strike. So basically, you must have noticed that the game is a large city kind of environment. It's a very large map. So for those kinds of map, what we do is we generally use something called terrains. So in 3D objects, we'll have this thing called terrains. So these terrains are basically very large entities. And like if you see, when I focus on the terrain, you can't actually even see where the camera and the directional light are. So like it's a very small uh, as it's very small as compared to the terrain. So you can actually check what the size of the terrain in Unity units are. But so this is what we have when we look at a terrain. When I look at it, let me position my camera a bit so that we can look at the terrain a bit better in the game view. Just to provide some perspective, when I position my camera here, so this is the camera that I have, and I've positioned it almost at one corner of the terrain. And when I see it in the game view, this is something that I can see. All right, so this is my terrain. Coming back to the terrain, let's see what some of the things are that we can do with it. Although terrain is not something that we'll be using in the game that we are creating, because as you can see, the game that we are creating today is very like a small environment. But this, I just wanted to let you know that these are some different ways that you basically can create uh, ground structures from. So, like you see right now, it's very flat, right? And whenever you are playing a game, there's different kinds of hills or depths, and there's water somewhere there's dirt, somewhere there's road. So there are different tools that are available to you inside Unity to basically create those in your terrain. So there are, depending upon what level of uh, designing experience you have or creativity you have, there are different tools that you can use to make these things in your game. One is like when you're creating something for your personal projects, or like just for let's say prototyping something, then it's just best to use the terrain structure inside Unity itself and basically create, like let's say if I want to create some hill sort of environment, so I can basically there are paint tools here that I can use. So like I can paint terrain, I think. Yeah, so paint terrain option is there, and the option is to lower or raise or low terrain. So like if I start clicking here, basically you see that I am creating hills. So let me keep it in front of the camera. So my camera is, where is the camera? So camera is here, and let's create some things, kind of things in front of that. So basically this is something that you'll see. So like if I want to create mountains, I can create these by using this tool. So, and there are different things, like if I just want to create small changes here, then you see this is being created. So these are tools that you can like when we come to some first person game, we can look at these specifically. But this is something that, excuse me, that you can start exploring on your own. Like these are very interesting things to do. That is why I just started with this. So this is something that you can start playing around with on your own. And then there are different features that you can use. So there's paint holes. So like if you want to create a water body somewhere or something like that, and you don't want to use what the terrain that you have, uh, uh, that this terrain only, and you want to create something else here. So basically you can change the like just don't use the terrain, and the mesh that you have of the terrain will like you can just remove that, and so basically there'll be nothing there, no vertices will be there, and your terrain won't be there, and it'll come as a blank, and you can basically let, if you want to create something inside that or outside, you can do that. Then there's an option in terrains to basically like let's say if you are building a very big city, very big vast city, then even though the terrain is already very big, then also the terrain might fall short for the kind of experience that you're trying to build. So in that case, what you can do is this tool is there, which is create neighbor terrains. So what if you click on this and if you go out, what you'll see is that it gives you an option to add terrains on each side. So if I click here, I'll add terrain and it adds a terrain for, and then I can just keep on adding whatever kinds of terrains that I want to add, right? And if I back somewhere here, I'll see is that basically uh, this whatever I'm doing here, a file is being created for me here, which is the terrain data file. So the what I'm getting here is sorry, this one. So for the terrain that I have created here, the terrain data that is being created is new terrain is here. When I created this one, for this the terrain data is here. So if I put this and pick this here, I'll have to. I don't see why that is not working. Okay, so I thought this will used to work before, but I guess not. So anyway, so basically whatever you do in the terrain is saved in this form. So like generally whenever we are creating something visual, we don't know how the computer is saving it and how these informations are being saved. So this is how Unity is basically saving your information that you are creating. So what else can you do with this? One more interesting thing is that uh, like one is basically like right now what you see is the texture that is there is all this black and white. Like this is the default material that is applied. So you can change that and you can paint, and depending upon what kind of there's layering of textures. So that we'll talk about later, or I'll share some resource videos depending upon where we are at in the course. And if we build it on our own, then I'll talk about it. Otherwise, I'll share some resources. Basically, you can paint your texture to the terrain in different styles. So like you can have a layer of grass and it'll look like 3D grass, and then you can paint a patch of dirt around in somewhere between that. So it'll look natural and realistic, and but it'll basically be on the terrain. So there are great tutorials on how to do those things. One thing that we'll see if we have any trees. So there's this uh, tree painter. So generally, when we create an environment, we'll basically uh, uh, like see if I don't have any objects that are trees. But like if I had some, like there are prefabs that are available like in the asset store. Like last time session we talked about asset store. From there I can download some asset which has trees in them. So if I get those assets and if I get those prefabs, I can add those prefabs here, and then I can paint trees basically in the environment. So generally when I have to add something to the environment, I have to place one object at a time or create a code to basically script the code. But when you're designing a terrain, you can basically paint the trees. You can just like right now what we were doing with mountains, we were painting mountains. The same thing can be done with trees. So you can select different kind of trees. You can select what density of trees do you want in an area and things like that, and you can basically paint it. So yeah, so these are the different things that you can do with the terrain. There are a lot more things that you can do in this. But this is something that I just, this is not our focus today. So we'll stop here. We'll delete these things. We'll delete these things, and then we'll move on. So yeah, so back to what we want to do. Before we move on, one more point is basically terrain building in Unity is just one ways to basically build your ground and build your setup. Another way to do the same thing would be to create your environments in some other tools like Blender or Maya or Max, and then bringing that environment in Unity and using, and then basically bringing that environment inside uh, Unity, and then creating the using that those 3D objects in Unity to basically set up your environment. So that is also one way to go, which a lot of uh, designers and game companies do. So for today, what we'll do is we want to basically create a smaller ground for us. So we use something called a plane, and we put it up here. Like you see, this is our camera. Now bring it, I'll bring it near the plane. Sorry, just zero it out so that it is at the origin. Same for the camera. So as you can see that with uh, in comparison to the terrain, the plane is comparatively very smaller, and it's basically you can see the whole plane in one view of your camera, right? So this is something that we want for today, and this feels right. So let's basically use change the name of the plane to ground, and there are again a few ways that you can change names of objects that are here. One is basically go here, and in this what you can see is there's few things that are here right on top. One is that you can select how to represent it in like the gizmos that show up here that we talked about. That camera is showing up something like this. Directional light is showing up like this. Or if there's something that you want to see in the scene, you can choose something from here. But like we'll look at the usability of this later at a later time. Then you basically have this option to activate and not deactivate it from the scene. So if it's ticked, it's basically activated. If it's not ticked, it's deactivated. So and then there's the name of the object. So right now it was plain and I changed it to ground. So the other way that you can do it is basically double going here, clicking on it, right click and rename. And another is basically slow click. One click while it is already selected, single click on it, and then you'll have the option to change. So changing the name to ground, and then basically let's increase the size a bit in each direction, 2 and 2. Let's see how it looks. Yeah, so it's big enough for us now. And like we see that there's a Y size to it as well, but let's see what happens if we change the Y. Let me get into position proper. Yeah, so if I change Y to 2, nothing happens because basically in plane or in any this kind of structure where plane or terrain, there's no Y element that you can change. There's only X and Z elements. You can't basically change the depth or height of this. So we can keep this one. There's one thing that we can see is basically if I change the So this is the scale tool if I want to change it in the scene view. And if I change the scale to negative, so that what happens is you see that now I can't see the plane, right? And if I go to the game view, my plane is not visible anymore. The thing is that it basically inverted, that's all, and I can now see it from below. So if sometime it happens to you that you're not able to see the plane from one side, it basically is inverted and it planes are not visible from both sides. It's only visible from one side. So depending upon how you texture or how you create your 3D objects, it will be visible from either one side or uh, both sides, or depending upon how your shaders have been created for that object, right? So cool. So now we have the ground setup, and next what we want to do is basically create a player that will move around in this ground. So for that, what we'll do is we'll again go here. We'll click 3D objects, and we want a sphere. Coming back to scene, and we'll take this also to the center 0, 0, 0. So what you can see is basically it's inside the ground, because our ground is also at 0, 0, 0, which is this point, which is the origin of the whole environment, and everything that you calculate in Unity will be with respect to this. So any distance, any unit that you calculate, any direction would be with respect to this origin. So when I ground origin, when I center the sphere also to 0, 0, 0, this is where it comes from. So I can basically pick it up and I see that by generally what the shape of primitive units in Unity is basically 1 cross 1 cross 1 mostly. So like the sphere has a diameter of 1. So what I'll do is the half of it was below it and half is above. So I'll just uh, make it 0.5. So it'll the rest on the surface of the ground. So now if I see here, it's right at the surface. Okay, so basically I have my player and ground setup. And what I can do now is basically to make it look a bit better. Like you can see, I am not able to see or differentiate between these things. So to make change that, I'll make some materials now and apply them to this. So we'll go into our folders, and we in the last session we saw that we already created a materials folder. We have not created anything, but we created a folder. So in this folder, we'll create some materials to create, and basically there's a material inside create, and let's create a material for ground. And uh, basically materials are something that you apply uh, on 3D objects, on any object, basically to paint them in a sense. So what we'll do first is basically we have to select what color do we want it to be, and that is represented by albedo. And we will, let's say for ground, we select some grayish color somewhere in this range, let's say. Okay, and basically you can see a representation of what it will look like here. What the when I apply it to the ground, it will look like. And then there are some things that you can change, some properties. Like you can see that there are a lot of properties in materials that you can change. But like for now, let's see what happens when I change metallic. So if I change metallic, you'll see the smoothness, shininess of the object is changing. So basically, it's changing the amount of light it will reflect, and then the smoothness that I can change. So like let's keep it somewhere around this, and metallic uh, somewhere around this. So anyway, like you can play around with this, change colors, change, look at what different things mean here, and we'll talk about some specific things when we talk about shaders and stuff. Then we'll look into what some of these, how we can change these, and how changing these will reflect upon what looks here. So now I've created the ground. Now how do I apply it? There are few different ways of applying it, like we talked about before. One is that I can pick it up and drop it here in the scene view. One is I can drop it on ground here. So easiest ways to do this and just dropping it here. So now this is what it looks like. Looks okay. And next what we'll do is we'll create a like player looks okay. If you want to change it, we can change it to, let's say, let's try to change it to blue or something. There's not much contrast left. So what we'll do is we'll leave the player for now as it was. So to do that, I can just press Ctrl Z and it'll remove, or if I can, what I can do is I can go here, and if I would have applied this to the player, sorry, if I would have applied this, I can basically remove. Uh, if I want to change it from here also, I can change it, or just best is to uh, like I can remove it from. I think yeah. So best is to just press Ctrl Z. I forgot how do you remove it. How do you remove from here? I'll check that and get back to you in the next session. So best to keep it like just white, let's keep it like this. We are not using the player material for now, right? So we changed the ground. We created a player, renamed the player to player. Now what we want to do is basically add movement to the player. So how do we do that? Like last time we saw that there are two ways of doing that. One is through translation and one is through force. So we want the player to have a fluid movement in inside the field. So like have a movement where like if I press forward, it slowly starts and then starts gaining speed. So that can only be achievable when we apply physics to it, like it rolls and not moves. So that we'll do by using physics, and we use the exact same code that we have tried last time, but let's just write a new code. So I'll go to player, and last time we saw that one way to create a script is adding script here. Like I can write the name of the script here. I want to create a player controller and creating new script and then create an add. So this way, basically, it will create the script, add the script, and create the script here. So I'll just put it back to the scripts folder. Now let's open this player controller script. Great. So now that we have the script, you remember that whenever we create a new script, it will open up like this. You will always have a start function and update function, and whatever script that you create will extend the mono behavior class. And this is a script that we used last time, and we actually ended up using this function only last time, right? We created, uh, we ended here in the last session. We added, used a rigid body, we added force, we created a basically whatever we did with adding force and some amount and all that. So yeah, so coming back to what we want to do today, we'll come back to this script and let's just remove everything. And today what we'll do is, again, we need to create the same thing. So what we'll do is uh, today we'll learn a different method of uh, referring to the rigid body that we create So we'll create a private rigid body RB. In the last session, if you remember, we created a public rigid body, and let's see how we did it in the last session once. So we did this. When we save it and we go back to Unity, what happens is here it'll show me RB. So I can add something here. So I've not added a rigid body component yet. Let me add that rigid body. That's it. Okay, come up here. Okay. So one way is that I can do this and drag it here and leave it here, and this is one way to do it. But this is how we did it in last session. Today we'll learn another way of basically doing the same thing, but through code. So what we'll do is instead of making it public, today we'll make it private. And then we'll start with start function. And in the start function, like I'm already getting the suggestion of the code, so I'll just use this. So RB, this rigid body equals to get component rigid body. So basically, this is the code that we use inside the script to access the component that is attached to this script itself. So what it is basically doing is checking the component rigid body. If this component is available here in this player, then it will basically just make the RB that component. So if I save this, go back here, now I won't see it, but if I uh, run it, it will work. So basically this line is doing the same thing that we were doing by dragging and dropping rigid body when this was public. I hope that's clear. So next what we'll do, now that we have the reference of the rigid body, now next we'll move on and we'll create the update function. Now we want to basically create a function to move the player, but we'll do that in the fixed update because we are using force. So how do we what do we want to do? We want to create a function which basically takes the input from the keyboard, which would be horizontal and vertical input. So like last time we saw, we'll create a variable called float move. Let's say we call it move horizontal, and this would be input dot get access horizontal. So this is something that we did last time. We took the values of x and y axes or x and z axes, whatever, and basically created horizontal and vertical axes. So to let's duplicate this line. So to do that, what I did is Control D. I duplicated this line, and I just want to change this to vertical, move horizontal to move vertical. Next, I'll create a new vector 3. Let's name it movement, and we'll give it new vector 3, and we'll basically add the horizontal movement in the x-axis, and we'll like if you remember from the last time, we have done this last time. The horizontal movement or the x movement goes to x-axis, and 0 in the y-axis. We do not want to move in the y-axis, and z in the vertical axis. So we'll just in a moment we'll see how this y, x, and z and not y. So go back to scene and go back here. Like if you see, we want to move the player in the red and blue arrows, not in the green arrow. So red is X, Z is blue, and Y is green. So we want to move the player in the XZ directions. So that is why we have horizontal and vertical mapped to X and Z. Now coming back to the script. Now that we have that, now what all that we want to do is basically just rigid body, add force, and add force 2 in the direction add force and basically keep it movement. So let's save it and let's go back to the project. Let's see how it goes. So we have our script. Let's go to the game view. Let's play. And now if I'm playing, I can see that it is moving. But if you see, it's very slow, right? Like this is not how you will be able to play a game properly. It's very slow. So let's stop. And what we can do is like we did this last time as well, is basically add a speed component. So how do we add a speed component? What we'll do is the best way to do that is to basically create a public variable. We public float it and basically just multiply that speed here. Now if we go back, sorry. Now if we go back here, we will see is we get a component of speed here. Let's make it, let's say 100. Let's see what happens. So that's a bit too fast for us. Let's make it 10. Let's see. Great, that looks fine. It's a bit challenging to control if we go near the edges, but we don't care because we'll add the boundaries. And yeah, so we are able to move the player around. I hope everyone is following till now. So great. So what's next for us? What do you want to do next is basically like right now it's not looking. So if we go back to the video, let's see, you see the player, the camera that is moves around with the player and not is not static. So you are basically focused on the player and moving around with the player. So let's do that first now. So generally one way to do that is basically just going to the player, uh, setting up the camera the way that you want to set up with respect to the player. So like player is here and I would like the camera to basically be more closer to the player and maybe just bit above, not a lot above, and a bit rotated. So let's say 45 degrees, that's, and make it come a bit closer. Sorry. So this is something that looks good. And if the player can follow around in this way, uh, my camera follows around the player in this way, like if it moves around with the player this way, that'll look good while I move around. But one way, in general, when you're creating a third person game, this is how you'll do is basically just bring the camera, drag the camera on the player, and this will basically make the camera the child of the player. So now if I select the player and I want to, if I change the position of the player, like I'm changing the position of the player in the X direction, you see the camera is also moving, right? Changing the position of by player in Y direction, the camera is moving along with the player. You can see, right? But this will basically create a problem for us when we move into the play area. Like, let's see how it works if we play it. So see what happens is when I click play, the camera is also starting to rotate because we have the player is a ball, but when we are applying force, it is not moving in a straight fashion, it is rolling. So that is why when the camera is attached this way to this kind of a player, the camera will start rotating. So this is not this is not the simplest way to do that here. So we'll have to do this also through script. So let's remove the camera back and up here only. So make it a bit cool. So what we'll do is we'll create again a new script, something called camera controller. And in this controller, we open the script up. Uh, First, let's put the script inside the script folder. It's very important to keep your projects managed. Basically, making a habit of uh, doing this, because like right now you'll think, why am I doing this? It's just 3 folders and things like that. But when you work on a big project, if you're not organized, it's you won't be able to work properly. So again, coming here, let's just remove all this and start. So what we'll, because we want to keep the camera at an offset from the player, we'll need the reference of the player. So where is the player going? I will move the camera along the same offset. So let's start with public game object. This is where I'll store my player, and then a private variable to store the offset. And this offset will be the vector 3, because I am storing, basically taking 2 positions, position of the uh, player, position of the camera, and the distance between them in all 3 directions, in all 3 XYZ directions that I have. That distance uh, will be my offset. How do I calculate the offset? When do I want to calculate the offset? Right now, because I have fixed the position that I want the camera and player to be in. Like this is how I want it to look. I can change it a bit if I want. Like let's say I want to change the camera a bit more. I can make it, that's a bit too above, and -8 in the Z direction also maybe. This looks a bit better. So like this is something that I want, let's say. And so to basically whenever I start the playing, whatever the camera and player offset is at the beginning, that is how I want what I want it to remain throughout whenever there is movement as well. So for that, what I'll do is basically create in my start function, I will first calculate the offset, which will be equal to transform.position uh, minus player transform position. So basically what I did is transform.position refers to my transform.position, who is me, camera controller. Where is camera controller attached? To the camera. So position of the camera minus the position of the player is basically my offset. And how do I want to keep updating the offset? Is I'll create the update function and basically keep changing my position, transform.position, sorry, not this. Transform.position will be equal to the player's position plus the offset. So the solution is valid. So player's position plus the offset is what I want to keep updating the camera's position to. Right. So I hope this what I'm doing here is clear. Now let's go back to the script, sorry, Unity. And in my camera, I get a player object. Just drag and drop it here. Let's see if this works. Now, if I move my player, I can see that my camera is moving well around with it. Right. So this is the effect that I wanted. Now, depending upon if I don't look, it doesn't look light to me, I can change the angle, position, whatever I want to do. So now it's set. Now next, again, going back here, next, what component do we want to add next? Next, let's add the collectibles that we want the player to be able to collect. So for doing that, we will add 3D object, cube. It's quite big. It's not big, it's basically we are very near it. We will take it to 0, 0, 0. And let's bring this also above. For this, basically, let's make the collectibles a bit smaller than the player. So we can scale it down to 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. And like now it also looks like it is hovering up over the ground, which looks nice for us. The collectibles will look nice in this way. And let's name it, change the name to collect. And also let's give it some rotation in each direction, maybe. Doesn't matter, I guess one or two directions would have given the same effect. So, but in any case, just this rotation. But if we look at the video, we'll see that there's like some movement in the collectible itself. Collectible is rotating around its own axis. So let's try to add that effect and see how that goes. So to do that, again, I'll create a new script. I will call it rotator. And the only purpose of the script is to basically rotate this cube around its own axis in some random, direction, just to make it look good. Putting it back in the scripts folder and then opening this rotator script. Now, all we need here is basically just an update function. And what do we do in this is basically there's a function in our transform. It's called rotate. And basically this will rotate your cube around whatever you want it to. So we will basically give it vector 3, new vector 3, and we'll give it angles for each direction, x, y, and z. We'll give randomly, let's give 15, 30, 45, or you can basically choose whatever you want it. Right, let's go back and see how this looks. So you see this is very fast, and we are not like this is not what we wanted, but you can see that it is rotating. Now why this is happening is because we have used update, and we in update it's frame dependent, so it is basically uh, creating this new rotation every frame, but we want it to smoothen out. So to do that, we can just basically control it by multiplying this by time dot delta time, and we talked about this last time as well. Doing this will basically smoothen it out, and there, perfect, looks nice. Cool. So stopping this, one thing that I missed in one of the previous things in the camera controller, I'll go back to this once, is that although it works like we want it to, but this is a concept that you should know is like we have talked about fixed update, like we saw what not adding this inside update does. And we've talked about why we use movement inside fixed update, physics-based movements inside fixed update, physics-based anything inside fixed update. So there's also something called as late update. So this thing that we're doing, where basically we want the camera to move after the player has moved. So we want in every frame, what we want as soon as the player changes the position, we want the camera to move. So what for doing that, if we are doing update, we are not sure that this function, this line takes place after the update of the player position has happened. But to ensure that this takes place after that has happened, we can use something called as late update. So I don't think you will visually see any difference, but the concept to know here is that there's a function called late update that you can use for functions that you're trying to create, where basically you want something to happen after the just after the update has finished. So like I in here I have for my player movement I'm using fixed update, right? So like this, as soon as this happens, my late update will run. So going back here, you see the player movement does not change. It's the same. Like visually, nothing has changed here, right? So that's it. That's the concept that I wanted you to know. So now, how do I uh, uh, basically add collectibles in the environment? There are again various ways of doing it. You can do it manually. You can do it through script. But today we'll do it manually. Before doing that, let's change the color of the collectible. Let's create a new material. We call it collectible. We'll change the color to orangish, some shade. Yes, smoothen it out, bit metallic, whatever makes it look good for you. So I think looks good. Contrast is good. Uh, Now let's add a few of these in the environment. So how do I do that? I can basically get this collectible. We talked about this before, something called prefabs. So I will create a new folder. I'll call it prefabs. This prefabs folder, I can just drag and drop this collectible, and basically this collectible has now become a prefab. So if I go to the top on view, sorry. So basically now whatever changes I want to make to one cube, I can make to all the cubes throughout, like if I want to do any changes or anything. Otherwise, I would have had to basically change every cube again and again. If I create multiple cubes after this, I would have to do that. But now I can change it. So now if I want to move this in the environment, uh, like right now, if you see that I'm able to move it, it's moving weirdly. So let's go to the top view, put it in, and it's an option view. So I was basically right now I was moving it locally, which basically means that we were what we were doing is basically moving it around its own axis. So for because that is why it like I'm choosing this and it's moving in all the directions. So I don't want that. I just want to basically try to move it around. So what I can do is basically change the axis and change it to global. So now if I move it, I can move it easily. So let's just lay around a few of these in the environment. And to do that, what I'll do is while collectible is selected, I'll just press Control D. So for when I press Control D, you see the new collectible is created. So I'll just move this here like this. And similarly, I can just quickly drop these in the environment wherever I want to. Not creating a perfect circle, but just for presentation. So now we have 10 collectibles in the environment. If we go to the game view, we can see that there are 10 of these. Now if we play, each of them are moving. We can go move around in the environment. So now our game is almost set up. All we now have to do is basically set up the boundary walls, which are fairly simple to do. And next is to create uh, some kind of a mechanism so that when I click, when these are clicking together, when these are connecting or colliding is the actual word, this disappears and I get a score that I have collected this. again, talking about being organized, like this doesn't look very nice. So to basically make it look better, I'll create a empty object. I'll call it collectible parent, zero it out, and move all my collectible items inside this, and then close it. So now my scene looks more cleaner. So next, just a second. It's already 5:10, around almost 5:08. So do you guys want to continue, or should we stop here and we can continue in the next session? Please let me know. If it is too much overload of information, we can stop here and continue in the next session. Or if you guys want to continue, we can continue as well. So if you want to stop here, please raise your hands. Only one guy wants to stop, everyone else wants to continue. Is that what I have to understand? Okay, so I think a lot of people are raising hands for stopping. Cool. I think we'll stop here, and then in the next class session we'll complete this game, and then we'll move on to more creating more games. So because this game is very simple, I would like you to start making this, and next class we can have on Monday itself, and we'll complete this. And one game you'll have in your portfolio, and there that day I'll also show you how to build it, how to actually, if you want to share it with your friends on, we right now, because we are not doing on mobile platform, because we have not integrated touch and like touch sensor kind of a thing, like where you can control it based on movement inside on a phone. We'll not build it for a phone. We can build it for a desktop or for web, but eventually we'll talk about how to build it for phones as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'm open for questions now. Otherwise, we can call it a day. If there is any question, please let me know in this in the chat, or you can raise your hand if there are questions. Otherwise, we'll stop. So should we stop, Akshat?
Yes, sir. I think no doubts are there.
Okay,
Thank you,
okay.
sir, for this session.
Thank you.
Also,
Thank
all
you.
participants are requested to switch on their cameras for a bit for a group photo. Kindly switch on your cameras.
Thank you, everyone. I'll take your leave.
Thank you, sir. All participants need to fill the Google form link now active. Kindly fill it as soon as possible.